Okay, hello. How's it going? I'm Amanda Fields. Welcome to Writing Across Borders. The Connecticut Literary Festival is produced and curated by the English Department at Central Connecticut State University with support from the CT Humanities. Special thanks to Real Artways, RJ Julia Bookstore, and all of our corporate and individual sponsors. We could not do any of this without their financial assistance. So please consider supporting the festival. After today's Literary Carnival, the festival will continue to promote the literary arts through their reading series, promoting the Connecticut Book Award finalists and the Connecticut Anthology in their virtual Lit Talk series. Please check the website for future programming. After the panel, please continue the conversation outside in the signing tent with the panelists. Now I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for our panel. Sergio Troncoso is the author of A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant's Son, a collection of linked short stories on immigration, which Luis Alberto Urrea called a world-class collection. Troncoso also edited the 2021 anthology, Nepantla Familias, an anthology of Mexican-American literature on families in between worlds, which received a starred review from Kirkus Reviews. A Fulbright scholar, Troncoso is currently president of the Texas Institute of Letters and teaches at the Yale Writers Workshop.
Thank you, Amanda. Can everybody hear me? Terrific. So I'm going to be your moderator, but also a participant today. And we have this panel, Writing Across Borders, and I'm really thrilled to have these two writers next to me and to talk about these topics like history and heritage and identity and writing across borders. And what I'm going to do is we're all going to read about 5 or 7 minutes. And I have a series of questions I want to ask them, and I'll probably answer myself. And then we're going to open it up to the audience to see what kind of questions you have. So I'm going to start with this writer to my left, Okey Ndibe, is the author of the novels Foreign Gods, Ink, and Arrows of Rain, the memoir, Never Look an American in the Eye, Flying Turtles, Colonial Ghost, and the Making of a Nigerian American. And he's co-editor of Writers Writing on Conflicts and Wars in Africa. The New York Times, as well as the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and the Mosaic magazine named Foreign Gods, Inc. as one of the best 10 books of 2014. A terrific writer.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Let's try again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Much better. Thank you very much, Sergio. It's a delight to join you again in conversation. I think we met at this very festival, the inaugural one, 2 or 3 years ago. And we were on the same panel, and we had just a wonderful, enlightening time. So I hope that today will be just as enriching. And for me, it's a particular delight that at the time of these disruptions in the global world, that literature is revitalizing our lives and bringing us back to slowly, but definitely surely, to a sense of normalcy. And the world needs that kind of healing. And literature, as I propose, is one of these, I think it's an essential equipment in this kind of rebirth, which the world really it's in need of. Before I give a reading, maybe I shouldn't get into that, because I was going to talk a little bit about my first introduction to what I would call the literature of migration, the slave narratives, where Africans who were brought to this country as captives began to talk about their lives. And that history has had a very rich and a very, I think, fertilizing effect to the contemporary moment. So what I plan to do is to read quickly from my, and please tell me when I get to my time, because one of the cultural things that I have is an absence of a sense of brevity, so I can go on and on and on. So I'm going to read a quick section from my memoir, Never Look an American in the Eye. And this section follows an encounter that I had with an American graduate student shortly after I came to this country. And he said to me, okay, how do you Africans, we've become friends. So one day he said to me, how do you Africans manage to come to America when there are no airports in Africa? And so I thought he was a rookie comedian, so I decided to answer in like spirit. So I said to him, we ride on the back of crocodiles across the Atlantic. And later that night he called me in a very earnest voice. He said, I'd like you to come meet my roommates, because I told them the crocodile story and they didn't believe it. So I want them to meet you so they will hear the story from your mouth. So I'm going to read a quick section, and please tell me once I hit, the time. Oh, please. Good. That's even better. The world has become hugless in the last couple of years, so hard work. What was it about Africa that enabled some Americans to, in effect, regard the continent as some form of pathology? On the one hand, simple and stark and digestibly knowable. On the other, mysterious, spellbindingly magical, remote. How many times did Americans tell me they had an African friend I must know? Their confidence based on the fact that their friend's father was an important man in Africa, a lawyer, say, or a dentist. And then, as if they believed that Africa was some small village rather than a continent of 50-plus countries, they would mention a name that rang a bell only because I had read numerous novels by different African writers and could conjecture that the name given to me was, in all likelihood, from some East African country, say. How many times would I ask how it was sleeping in Africa at night with all that racket from lions, baboons, and monkeys, to say nothing of the slithering venomous snakes and the myriad nameless gnomes and goblins? Why was it easy to render Africa some utterly other location, a space devoid of logic and order, indeed a habitat where simplicities, mayhems, chimeras, and other incredible phenomena took root, sprouted to life, thrived? In the twin decades of the 1980s and 1990s, America saw the germination among black Americans of an intense renewal of interest in Africa. It expressed itself, this Afrocentric consciousness, in a certain buoyant identification with Africa, especially its ancient civilizations and kingdoms, Pharaonic Egypt chief among them. But that awakening was not without its distortions and disfigurations. I remember when Brian Gumbel, then one of the biggest stars in morning network television, decided to take his show to Africa. There was much coverage of the event in the media. Though no fan of talk show TV, I was infected by all the excitement and decided to tune in. On a continent with numerous studios, Gumbel chose to broadcast from an open park with animals prancing in the background. I hazard that he didn't mean to, but he reinforced the idea that animals were inescapable in the African landscape. They were, in fact, the dominant presences, a sort of synecdoche for the entire continent. If Gumbel would choose to project Africa via the lens of animals, imagine the temptation for people who have even less information and much less of a stake in the matter. One day, I arrived at Union Station, Hartford, to pick up my brother-in-law who was visiting from Nigeria and was supposed to come in on an Amtrak train. On finding out that his train was running 30 minutes late, I ducked into a nearby bar to have a beer while I waited. Soon, two women walked in and took the stools nearest to me. They ordered drinks and instantly carried on a conversation in a loud voice interspersed with carefree laughter that accentuated the impression that they were already inebriated. I feigned interest only in my drink, but stole glances at them. "Hi, honey. How you doing?" one of them addressed me. I had been too late to avert my gaze. "Fine, and you?" "We're having a great time," she said. Then she informed me that it was her companion's birthday. "Oh, happy birthday," I said. "Thanks, honey," the birthday celebrant replied. Then she added, "Where are you from, sweetie? You have an acute accent. I just love it." "From West Hartford," I said. "So do you. And I really love your own accent." "Me?" she asked, momentarily confused. "I don't have an accent. I was born here." With her forefinger, she pointed down. "I don't believe it. Right here?" I asked. "I kid you not, honey. You were born right in this bar?" She raised her head and her laughter pierced the air. "You got a great sense of humor." "No, I mean I was born and raised here in Connecticut. Lived here all my life." "That explains your accent," I insisted. She laughed again. "You are too funny, honey. So tell me for real, where are you from?" "I told you, West Hartford." "I mean originally." "I originally just came from there," I insisted, oddly enjoying the exchanges. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
I was actually going to just keep you going because I love hearing your voice, by the way. Absolutely an excellent reader. So now to Okey's left, Roya Hakakian, am I pronouncing that correctly? Is the author of A Beginner's Guide to America, Assassins of the Turquoise Palace, and Journey from the Land of No, which all of, I think, are right out there with R.J. Julia selling them, and has published 2 collections of poetry in Persian. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and on NPR's All Things Considered. Since 2015, she has taught at Thread, a writing workshop at Yale, and is a fellow at Davenport College at Yale. Welcome.
Thank you. I think I'm going to be in conversation with you and do my version of Where Are You From, which is in this very book. So since we all have fun with that, as soon as people hear our accents, I will do that, and then the two of us can swap memories. So this book walks the immigrant, or pretends to walk the immigrant, through America from the moment of arrival until the immigrant finds an apartment, opens a bank account, does all these things that every immigrant needs to do, and then the second half of the book walks the immigrant through life after those early struggles in resettling. But what the first few chapters do is be a guide, as just like any other guidebook that walk other travelers through other cities. And I say pretends to be a guide for an immigrant, because at the end of the book, I hope a lot of non-immigrant Americans come to the conclusion that they have taken as much away from the experience of learning what America looks like through the perspective of an immigrant, just as a newly arrived immigrant might have. So in the voice of a guide, giving instructions, this is what the narrator is advising the immigrant who has been here just a couple of days, what her or his first encounter with a non-immigrant American might look like. So somebody knocks on the door and says, "How are you doing?" and "Is everything okay?" And then the next question is, "Where are you from?" And there, you have arrived at the most vexing 4 words of your early days in America. Your reaction to this will be, above all, one of alarm. Your immediate thought will be that your pleasant manner has failed. After all, he has found you out, knows you're not from here. You take it to mean that you do not belong. And if you have a particularly gloomy nature, you worry that you can never belong. Even after years of being here and trying to fit in, your accent or something else about you will always give you away, and the question, with a minor variation, can still haunt you. Where are you really from? When you're new, as you are on that first morning, anxiety explains all things before reason does. But in time, you will see that there are many interpretations for those 4 words, as there are words for snow, for Eskimo. Asking where you are from can often simply be a way of breaking the proverbial ice. You might say, "I'm from Thailand," to which the person asking the question could, in turn, excitedly say, "My housekeeper is Thai," or "I love drunken noodles." You might not be fond of your national cuisine, but no matter. "Where are you from?" is launched into the conversation only to further the introduction. Even the native-born ask each other the same question just to get acquainted. Sometimes it might lead to a wistful memory. "You're the spitting image of my cousin Matty. May he rest in peace." Or, if the person asking is a single man or woman in pursuit of love, the following can ensue. "If everyone in your country looks like you, I know where I must go for my next vacation." Such lines are most common at watering holes and nightclubs. However, an encounter with a freshly arrived immigrant can have a disarming effect, not unlike that of alcohol. In truth, and especially in those early days, "Where are you from?" is prone to cause more trouble than good. If you come from a communist or other anti-American stronghold, you worry that the person asking might be wondering about your allegiances. If you come from a country in the throes of civil strife, you fear he might suspect that you have fought on the wrong side of the conflict. If you are from a nation with a record of fist-pumping, sword-brandishing in front of television cameras, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, for example, sometimes he, wishing to confirm the place of your origin, might run his hand across his neck to sign a beheading. That is when you realize that a meat cleaver is now shorthand for your ancient civilization. In the early days after your arrival, "Where are you from?" is above all a reminder of your unpreparedness to speak of the past. You have yet to shape your story, what you saw, why you left, how you left, and what it took to get here. This narrative is your personal book of Genesis, the American volume, the one you will sooner or later pen in the mind, if not on the page. You must take your time to do it well and to do it justice.
Thank you.
We
Wow.
can swap stories, right?
Yeah, I can't wait to get into the discussion. But so anyway, I'm just going to do my spiel, my reading a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about these 2 books, but I'm just going to read a very short piece from the newest one. So this is A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, and it's a collection of 13 stories all about immigrants, but it's also about perspectivism. Because anyone who's read my work knows that I'm heavily into philosophy. But I grew up right on the border, actually, with electricity. And an outhouse in the backyard, and then I ended up at Harvard and then went to Yale. So in many ways, I feel like I kind of compressed 2 generations in one body, and I'm still kind of trying to make sense of it all. So this collection is about immigration, but it's also about perspectivism and Nietzsche and Virginia Woolf. So and by the way, I challenge any of you, I put puzzles in my books that I believe in 10 years it will probably not be solved. And so there were some writers that I was having a conference with yesterday that said that they're going to do this. So this book just came out, and it's an anthology I edited with some of the best Mexican-American writers today, and it's all about Nepantla. It's called Nepantla Familias, an anthology of Mexican-American families in between worlds. And Nepantla is an Aztec word, which means living in between, in the middle ground. And many immigrants, I think, do, between languages, between borders, between geographies, between psychologies. And by the way, we just sold out of the hardcover. It was out since April, so they had to reprint it. So I think it's moving along, but and it has the best thing to know about this anthology is of the 30 works, 25 are published here for the first time. So and great writers like Reina Grande, Sandra Cisneros, Helena Viramontes, etc., and I have an essay in it. So I'm going to read the last part of my essay, which originally appeared in New Letters in Independence, Missouri. And it's just a very short snippet from the essay and sort of my philosophical musings on what I do and why I do it as a son of an immigrant. And by the way, one of the things that was a little bit chuckling about is they're actually immigrants. I'm the son of an immigrant. And the difference is when somebody asks me, where are you from? I'm not polite like they are and nice. I usually just shove them in the head and get the heck out of my way. That's what happens when you become part of this country, I think, in a way. You know, you don't respond in that sort of polite way. But anyway, that's probably me. This is from Life is Crossing Borders. I wrote my first short story out of a sense of loneliness as a graduate student of philosophy at Yale, because I wanted to create a new home, to connect the ideas I was exploring in philosophy, especially from German philosophers such as Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Wittgenstein, with characters back on the border and the people I loved from El Paso, Texas. I wanted to make my philosophical questions relevant to my borderland community, and to bring this marginalized community and their questions into the debates of literature. Why did this matter? You cross a border because you are searching, because you want more, because you want to match where you are with who you are, because you want to test your place, maybe because you want to expand your sense of place. You are searching for something that may yet be indefinable. A border crosser questions the very idea of home. I wrote my first short story, Mi Abuelita, with the protagonist as a version of my grandmother, who in the story is arguing with her grandson at Yale as he is explaining to her Heidegger's philosophy of being towards death. My aim was to break the stereotypes of what Chicano literature could be, to show Mexican Americans as thinkers, and to bring to life on the page an abuelita on the border who would have essential lessons to share with the wider world about how to live life. In a sense, what I was trying to create a new home, where characters from the border, American literature, and philosophical questions all belong together in one place. Would the wider world ignore the border or keep stereotyping it with prejudiced images? Would white audiences, far from the border, read writing from a Mexican-American writer and appreciate that he is at once writing about his people and exploring how we are all together facing these dramas, Can more Mexican American writers, without sacrificing their voices, break into the too white world of New York publishers, be promoted by them, and change stereotypical views about Mexican Americans in books read not only on the border but beyond it? The answers to these questions will arrive long after I am not here to ask them. I am as often hopeful as I am hopeless, but these waves of optimism or pessimism never push me off course. I cross borders because I believe that's how you respect the truth in writing and living. I cross borders because I believe that's how you find out who you are and how you discover your kindred spirit across cultures and peoples. I cross borders to break open a new landscape for American literature. And most important, I cross borders to include in the greater discussions of culture, literature, and politics those who have been previously excluded. I cross borders to give a voice to outsiders. So I wanted to ask, all of us, I have a few questions, I have a lot of questions. And I want to start with this one, and you can take turns answering it, and tell me what you think. As an American, okay. We can, whoever goes first on the first question will go second on the next one, and that way everyone will be in the hot seat at the beginning. So as an American immigrant writer, or the son of an immigrant, why do you think our tolerance for the other, whether that's a Mexican immigrant or a Muslim from Iran or someone else, why do you think this tolerance is eroding? And how can we encourage what I call a practical empathy, so to speak, for the other that is also in the best interest of the United States?
Wow. All right. So I picked the lottery, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can go first too.
Well, I started, so I might as well wrestle with it. Part of what I think part of the tension that we see across so many different lines, sectarian lines, lines of identity, lines of geography, history, and so on, is a particular tension that is created by the invention of the internet. So that the internet has, on the one hand, made us familiar with the other, but in the sheer profusion, the sheer manyness of these histories and mores and attitudes and so on, experiences that we have to contend with, there is a part of us as humans that I tell people, that there is this, some people call it implicit bias. But in a lot of ways, it's a way that we're wired to encounter the unfamiliar, okay? We're constantly, when somebody speaks in a different accent, when somebody worships a different God, when somebody comes from a part of the world that we don't recognize, So sometimes I say to people, I'm from Nigeria, and they don't even know where Nigeria is, and they say, oh, I know, it's next to Jamaica, right? But when you encounter somebody else whose roots are unfamiliar to you, there's a part of us which is a psychological response that disquiets us. We feel like we're in this presence of strangeness. And then the more we come to know this other person, we see that there are certain irreducible qualities that we share. And then we relax on. And I think that that's actually, to sort of go to the second part of your question, I think that that's where literature begins to play a role. I understand when you said that you don't do well with this question, where are you from? Now, it's not that I'm very patient with that question, but in a lot of ways, I also have fun with it. So I turn it against the person who is asking me. And in a lot of ways, what I say to the person, when somebody says you have an accent, I then complicate that question by telling them that they have an accent as well. And people don't realize it, that to some degree or another, all of us have accents, So when they pose it, I make it a learning moment for them by basically breaking it down for them that they have an accent. And I'm actually have less of an accent in English than they would if they attempted to speak my Nigerian language. So part of in my novel, for example, Foreign Gods, Inc., there's a character named Ike. Now, Ike means strength and power. But a slight inflection in the pronunciation, Ike, will mean your buttocks. So this guy, and the Americans will call him Ike. He says, no, I'm Ike, and they can't hear the difference. And so in a lot of ways the novel then writes the question, is he a person of moral character and strength, or is he an ass? And the Americans constantly will call him the buttocks and so on. But I think that part of what literature does is that literature is this great imaginative tool for humanizing the other by rendering the other in the other's full complexity. So once we recognize, which is again the best case for a multicultural curriculum in schools, for us to experience one another in our great variety and manyness, that when we do this, we find that we have a lot more in common in our shared humanity than we have differences. So this is a very jumbled, but you asked a very philosophical question. So this is my attempt, a messy attempt at answering it.
Great answer. Thank you. Excellent.
First, or I go first.
I'm not sure I agree with the question. I'm not sure the support for Muslim Americans or Mexican Americans is eroding. I just happened to come from Laredo, Texas, where I was last week, and I was astounded at how little I knew about border towns in America. It was wonderful. Everybody expected me to speak Spanish, and I constantly apologized for not speaking Spanish. I mean, there was a very harmonious life, and and I realized that living up on the East Coast, I only rely on social media, as you mentioned, and the news, and I think it's mayhem. It wasn't mayhem. It was a beautiful, coexistence. So, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. But the other is, as an Iranian, I can tell you that I have been, having come from a country in both the throes of a very violent revolution and also a violent war that came after that revolution, I have seen what real intolerance looks like, as I'm sure you have encountered it, and I was very moved by what happened in America after 9/11. A lot of terrible things happened to Muslim Americans, but we also forget that at the end of the day, those instances of violations of rights have been the subject of many lawsuits and court cases that we didn't let whoever was doing those things to Muslim Americans get away with it. And it's been part of the national conversations for the past 20 years. So what I'm trying to say is that a little bit of perspective helps us see that we can do better, and we have some ways to go. But in the global perspective of what's going on, I don't think we're doing very badly. I think things have moved forward. I think where we were 200-300 years ago, how intolerant we were to Chinese Americans, for God's sake. The Chinese Exclusion Act, which we don't talk about because we have other atrocities that come ahead of that. We are not that people. We didn't. 9/11 was comparable to Pearl Harbor, but we didn't round up people and put them in concentration camps or detention centers as we had done, with Japanese Americans. So, in the much larger perspective, I think we have come a long way, and I think we should then focus on what we can do better.
Let me try to approach the answer from my point of view. Because I think, Roya, you're right that, I always want to be hopeful, of course, and progressive, that things are going to get better. But I think that's also, in many ways, something that is just hope. If you go to Texas, where I am there all the time, and you see the Mexican immigrants coming up, and now Central American immigrants, they are treated like animals. Their children have been put into cages. They're still in cages. This is not hyperbole. This is not something I'm making up. You don't see this on the East Coast. You don't see this in the Ivy League. But it's happening. And we ignore it because these people are poor. They come with next to nothing. They don't know the language. So then when they get abused, and they're being abused right now, you don't hear about it. You hear about it if you travel the border, if you are around. And by the way, sometimes the Mexican Americans who have made it here, in El Paso or in Laredo sometimes they're the ones who are the ones trying to keep them out. So the picture gets a little muddy. People make it, and then they want to say, stop, for the next group coming in. And so there's a lot of inhumanity that never makes the New York Times. But if I will take you to colonias on the border right now, in which there are awful things happening. And it's very quiet, and it's America. It's the United States. And it's not that it's happening everywhere. So I think you're right that, frankly, I'm thrilled that I live on the East Coast. I'm thrilled that it's a much more tolerant atmosphere here. And I think it is regional. You go to different places in this country, and you travel like I do a lot. And a place like here, there's not going to be a problem wearing a mask, what you're doing. If I go to somewhere outside of Austin, and I'm wearing a mask at a restaurant, they'll physically escort me out because they do not allow people who wear masks. And they might beat me up, and that is not hyperbole. So I'm just saying it's regional. So of course you always want to believe it's getting better everywhere. But I think you also want to be true to what's happening around the country. And for me, I do believe in what Okey was talking about, which is empathy. You really want to reach out, you want to say, we do have commonalities. I do have commonalities. And I tell this story often when I give speeches across the country. I say I would be the perfect mayor of Jerusalem. My wife is Jewish. My parents are Christian, Mexican Catholic, and my sister is a Chicana Muslim. She converted, yeah. You're smiling. Wait till I should tell you about my sister. She converted, married an Iranian, and she now has 5 kids, and they live in the United States. So they literally are all part of my family. But we argue, we discuss, and sometimes it's very raw, and sometimes we come together, and that's kind of what it is. I'm going to ask you another question for you guys, and this one, let's see what you think of this one. I'm skipping around because of what you answered. So my grandfather, Sergio Troncoso, was a Mexican journalist and newspaper editor in the 1920s and 30s. He was thrown in jail 28 times by the Mexican government. for writing anti-corruption articles. He told me as a teenager, "Don't become a journalist," Sergio, "because if you tell the truth, people will hate you forever." On the other hand, Chinua Achebe said, quote, "The man dies in all who keep silent in the face of tyranny." It's a very important quote. But what do you think is the ethical... I got the right one. So what is the ethical and moral responsibility of an immigrant writer when writing fiction or nonfiction? Not only about the country or community you came from, but also the American community you adopted. How does being here, but not there, allow you a certain freedom to criticize that you would not have if you were only there? Why is this living in the middle ground, or is this in between what the Aztecs called Nepantla, the most fulfilling for a writer, even if it is also the most fraught with alienation, loneliness, and a certain artistic homelessness?
I go first? Yeah. All right. You know, it's interesting because you said, what's the responsibility? I write, I think, about the same thing all the time. I think in some ways it looks like I've written 3 different books, and I have. But at the heart of all 3, there is a fundamental shared theme, which is here's an outsider or someone who has experienced injustice speaking to you. You know, I wrote a memoir. That was the story of the memoir. I wrote a second book, which was about a political assassination of a few Kurdish Iranians in Germany by the Iranian government. That was also the story of an injustice. And in some ways, this book, which is about, you know, giving guidance to immigrant who arrives in America, is also about, you know, how somebody who doesn't belong, an outsider, is trying to justify his or her existence in this country, and kind of creating a logic for why this person should be embraced. Because I thought of this book when, in 2016, when so much anti-immigrant rhetoric was just flying everywhere. You know, I don't do it because I feel responsible. I do it because nothing else interests me. I am not, I told my agent and my editor a long time ago, you can count on me never writing about wine or golfing or horses. I mean, they're all wonderful. I think wine is great. Golfing looks like fun. And horses are beautiful. But I'm not the one to write about them. But, you know, I will always write about what I witnessed a long time ago and how those eyewitness accounts have affected the way I see everything else since then. And I think, you know, one could think about it as a responsibility, but I also, my view of it is, I'm really not good for anything else. This is the thing that most moves me. This is the thing that I think I know most about, and this is the thing that I'm probably most articulate on.
All right, as you spoke, it struck me that there are echoes of your grandfather's life in my own experience. I was a journalist in Nigeria, an editor of a weekly magazine, and Chinua Achebe invited me to this country to be the founding editor of an international magazine that he published. And so that's how I ended up coming here. And so in 1999, as Nigeria made a transition from prolonged military dictatorship to an elected government, the newspaper that I worked for in Nigeria invited me to start a weekly column. And they wanted me to write columns out of America. Sort of, Alistair Cook was a British columnist who lived in the US for years and wrote a column called Letter from America. So he reflected on some of the idiosyncrasies of American life for his British audience. So they wanted me to be the Nigerian Alistair Cook. So the first two columns I wrote were on America. Then I said, there is a drama, there's a conversation going on in Nigeria, this major transition to a democratic government. That nascent experience with all the tensions, all the problems that were integral to it. So I said I'll much rather be part of that conversation rather than write about America per se. So I began to write and got myself quickly into trouble because I began to call out corruption by the country's military leadership, by the country's elected leadership. And so on one occasion, the Nigerian Senate said that I had defamed them and that I should appear before them to answer questions. And there was a resolution passed unanimously. They told my editor to produce me and so on. And I told them if they paid my flight ticket that I would come. Of course, they didn't pay my flight ticket. But several years later, one of the presidents who was produced in an election which he himself agreed was massively rigged. But his argument was that he would have still won had the election been credible. So I made an ethical position that in my column, I will never call him president. So I'll call him resident of Aso Rock. Aso Rock is sort of the equivalent of the White House in Nigeria. So I'll write about him and say the resident of Aso Rock. Sometimes I'll call him usurper. And so his government put my name on a list of enemies of the state. And so from 2000, then he died in office in 2010. His vice president took over and actually came to the White House to visit with Barack Obama. And three of his officials called me and proposed that I come to DC and meet with him, that he was a fan of mine and so on. So I said, no, I can't meet with this man because he's part of the government that had declared me an enemy of the Nigerian state. So they gave him the message and he asked them to assure me that he had ordered my name to be removed or the list to be expunged. So the next year in January, I went into Nigeria and got arrested because my name was still on the list. So if you Google my name and you see, you put in arrested or detained, you see lots of stories that were broadcast around the world. And so over the last 10 years, so I was just in Nigeria in December. I was stopped at the airport coming in, stopped. Again, I nearly missed my flight coming out January 20th, and so on. So I live the same kind of tension. So I've been arrested maybe 20 times, going in and coming out of Nigeria for 10 years. But when I started out as a journalist, by the way, the section you read, the quote you read is from Wole Soyinka, who was the first African to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. So in his book, prison memoir, called The Man Died, Soyinka says that the man dies in all who keeps silent in the face of tyranny. And somewhere in the book, he also says that justice is the first condition of humanity. And so when I was writing my first novel, first of all, I read that book of his, that memoir, in high school as a high school student. And it spoke to me in a bewitching way that the man dies in all who keeps silent in the face of tyranny. So when I set out to write my first novel, Arrows of Rain, I knew that I wanted to examine silence, this fraught relationship between silence and power. Okay? And so in my novel, I invent a character who is a repository of moral wisdom in the novel, a grandmother called, who tells her grandson, who is a journalist, a story that must be told, never forgive silence. So it was my way of rephrasing, reframing Wole Soyinka's statement, and so on. So I wrote my column for 18 years. I just stopped it in 2017, partly because the newspaper that carried my column said I was getting them into too much trouble, and that some governors and governments were not inviting them to things and not giving them adverts and so on, so they stopped my column. I'm about to start it on my own, a blog, and so on. So over the years, because Nigeria has had a history of the assassination of outspoken critics of the government. So people will say to me, whenever I'm on my way to Nigeria, my wife gets an earful from people who think that they're going to kill me and so on. And so on one occasion I went to Nigeria and I was speaking at the university at a big conference where Wole Soyinka happened to be there, other international writers were there. And so I wanted to go to the bathroom, and about 50 students came out with me and surrounded me. They started saying to me, "We didn't believe you would come," because there was so much fear that I might be a subject of assassination. So I said to the students, something just came to me, and I said to the students, fear is a choice, and I have chosen not to fear. And the way I explained the column that I wrote for 18 years and the way that I wrote the column, the sort of direct, unsparing, unflinching criticism that I made of the government, and my willingness to go to Nigeria, sometimes I go as many as 3 times a year, is that silence will kill me. If I kept silent, I would die in the face of injustice. So I say I might as well speak. And the odds are that you will die from silence, or you will die for speaking up. I'd much rather be killed for speaking. But that's me. But on one occasion, I was given a pause. There was this politician that I had focused on, a total criminal who lived in LA, was a taxi driver, met the former president of Nigeria, went into Nigeria as a presidential aide, made a ton of money, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was being installed as the governor of my home state in an election that was absolutely rigged. And he bought everybody in the media, was the only person pointing out he was answering to Dr. Andrew, but I said, no, this guy didn't have even a high school diploma, but he gave himself a doctorate. So after a while, he began to put by full-page adverts in newspapers where he insulted me, said I was a poverty-pulverized professor. I had fun. I called myself a poverty-pulverized, my poverty-pulverized self. So somebody called me one day and said, this guy would kill you because of what you're doing to him, but he can't get you because you're in America, but he could go after one of your siblings. So that gave me pause, because I chose to write. My siblings are not writing, so I said I have no right to endanger the life of any of my siblings. But I called my 2 brothers who live in Nigeria separately. I said, people are concerned that you might be hanged because of my column. And separately they said to me, please keep writing, we're proud of what you do. I haven't quite engaged with your question, but it's just that you spoke in a way that intersected with my experience, so I wanted to share that story. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so we have to end, and we started a little late, but someone like Emiliano Zapata, just to turn it, he said, of course, I would rather live on my feet I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. So that's a similar concept. Thank you very much for coming.